Hello, my name is Animus of va.games. Welcome to the first episode in a series dedicated to teaching you how to pilot helicopters in Battlefield 3. This series is going to presume that you already know how to fly and at least have had some combat experience in attack helicopters. And while these tips are oriented towards attack helicopters in Battlefield 3 in particular, most of these tips are general enough to be carried over into earlier and later versions of the game, as well as to scout and transport helicopters. What I will be going over very briefly for this introduction video is the loadout. My loadout differs pretty fundamentally from most mainstream helicopter pilots because I forego such luxuries as stealth, maintenance, and the almighty laser painter for the awareness awarded to me by the air radar. When you fly, and specifically when you fly well, you're going to attract a lot of attention from other players with whom you share the great blue skies. And unless you're abdicating your duty to covering units on the ground, you're never going to be completely aware of enemy aircraft positions at all times. This is a problem because in air-to-air combat engagements, timing is everything. The first air vehicle into a fight is most often the only one to come out of it too. With the air radar, you can ensure that no other would-be ace pilot ever gets the drop on you. This is especially useful in defense against competent jet pilots, whose number one advantage over the helicopter is being able to break line of sight to take advantage of blind spots. Secondly, I greatly prefer the flares to the ECM jammer for attack helicopters. You could make the argument for the ECM jammer in the scout helicopters because of the differing agility and the prevalence of laser-guided weaponry, but in attack helicopters the flares are the only way to go. The flares require more skill to use well than do ECM jammers because they only spoof incoming warheads in an instant, whereas the ECM jammer prevents all locks for several seconds while also spoofing most incoming warheads. The biggest concern that I have against ECM jammers is that if I fire the ECM and think that I killed the source of a lock, or think I can get away from it, but don't, and there's a good chance that I don't, then there's an even better chance that I'm going to take one or more hits and have to land to repair, if I'm not killed outright. As you can see in one of the clips in this video, all I had to do was start locking the enemy helicopter to get him to pop the ECM. But you can clearly see that I was turning away from him, and thus not actually trying to lock and fire, so when his ECM jammer finally wore off, he was a sitting duck for incoming heat seekers. With flares, you should never be caught with your pants down in this way. So the ultimate loadout, as far as I'm concerned, is air radar, the mandatory heat seekers, and IR flares. The loadout is completely at the discretion of the pilot, and this particular loadout depends on keen self-awareness and high-end technical flying abilities. You need to be able to take some tight turns and consistently pull risky maneuvers at dangerously low altitudes. If you're not yet at this level, consider safer alternatives such as the ECM jammer and stealth until your skill improves. What this series is going to do is demonstrate many of the skills and maneuvers helicopter pilots can employ to handle various situations. What the series is not going to do is give you a one-size-fits-all move that will always work. Each one of these techniques is a tool, not in and of itself a solution, and it is up to the discretion of the pilot to determine which tool is the most appropriate for each situation as it occurs. Here is a for instance. If there's a group of enemies on the roof at Objective Bravo on Firestorm, you would want to perform an offensive strafe on the target. For dealing with slower, immobile, ground-based targets, like infantry on a roof, the optimal strafe technique would most likely be the circle strafe. You fly in a circle around the target while keeping the helicopter's nose, and thus its guns, trained on the target in perpetuity. However, if the airspace you need to occupy in order to perform the maneuver is particularly hostile, you're going to need something else. The airspace can be hostile for many reasons, such as the presence of other enemy air vehicles or stingers on the ground. In those cases, attempt something that I call mowing the lawn, where you fly very low at the target, come up just over the top of it, and drop back down and fly through the target. Typically, this is done in a flight path perpendicular to the line formed between the enemy and allied deployments. Although this modified strafing maneuver does not offer the best and most convenient vantage point for engaging the target, it deals with a major vulnerability of the alternative by negating the need to occupy hostile airspace for longer than necessary. In situations where you're likely to be disabled, such as flying in hostile airspace, it is a good idea to reach and maintain maximum speed across the ground. When you are disabled, the engine fire debilitates the power of the helicopter, preventing it from accelerating effectively. You want to be able to build up as much momentum as possible before you get disabled so that you can fly as far away from the danger zone as possible to land and repair. Now, despite what you may have been told by some montage videos of so-called elite pilots using their gunner's TV missiles, the helicopter is at its best and most powerful when a pilot and an equally competent gunner are working together. Gunners can be very effective at locating the source of incoming Stinger missiles, spotting targets, and keeping the pilot aware of things beyond his periphery. A good pilot and gunner crew will always outperform a better solo pilot. Optimally, this is a great example of greater than the sum of its parts. That being said, not every pilot is good for every gunner, and not every gunner is good for every pilot. Every pilot has certain preferences, especially when it comes to the handedness regarding turning and spinning. It is important that the pilot knows what his gunner is capable of and what he's not capable of. The pilot has to be able to trust his gunner to spot and help eliminate threats to the helicopter, just as the gunner has to be able to trust the pilot to keep them both alive. This dynamic is absolutely vital and is completely different from player to player. The only way to develop this symbiosis is by playing with a gunner long enough for you to become familiar with each other. In the last Caspian border clip, I'm aware of the enemy helicopter trying to attack me, but decide to relocate nearer to some rocks and trees at the base of the radio tower. However, as soon as I try to attack from my new position, I realize that the enemy pilot has begun an advance that compromised that new position. Although I was taking damage from his gunner, I performed a flip maneuver that switched over our positions and put me at his back. I will leave you with the words of Sun Tzu. If the enemy has occupied advantageous ground before you, do not follow him, but retreat and try to entice him away. And as always, thanks for watching.